Hello everyone, Britt here from Scrappy Boy Stamps, and today we're going to do a tutorial for the Wicked Wall Mirror mini album. This die is pretty simple to put together, but I did want to show how to make it into a shaker. So let's go ahead and cut our pieces. First, we're going to cut the main base layer, as well as the stitched base layer. As you can see, I did not have the color of cardstock I wanted, so I created some off camera using a little bit of ink blending. Pretty much all of the details come from this frame piece. The main part of the frame also has a stitching detail, framed at the top and bottom by some beautiful filigree. To use this as a simple frame without the shaker, you would need to cut it a minimum of 2 times. Once for the color of the frame, and a second time for the interior of the mirror. For this project, I cut it 5 times total. Stick with me and I'll explain. Lastly, I cut one of the 3 words from this set, Wicked, and its outline. Now that everything's cut, let's start assembling. First, I'm going to use some liquid glue and adhere the stitched base layer to the main base layer. I actually love that this is a little less complicated than what we usually put together. I feel like this die gives a big impact with not very many pieces. It's also easy and quick to put together. So this would be a great die set for somebody who was a little less experienced. At this point, I knew I wanted to add stenciling to the inside of my shaker. The oval from the middle of the frame will be my stencil panel. So to make sure I can place that panel right where I want it, I'm adhering the first layer of the frame cut out of a single piece of cardstock. The frame fits perfectly in the stitched layer, and I make sure to press down firmly over all of those little filigree bits, ensuring everything is laying lovely and flat. As always, I love using liquid glue for this. It gives me a little open time to make sure things are laying exactly where I want them. I check to make sure my panel is going to fit perfectly back into the frame, and then I'll set that piece aside so that we can move on to the stenciling. I decided to use just the base of my stencil and stamp tool for this. This tool has a layer of sticky grid paper. So far it has remained sticky enough to hold down my paper and stencil whenever I've used it. The first stencil I'm going to use is the Cinderella Scene Builder. I love all the options on this stencil, but today we're only going to use the silhouette of the castle and some of the stars in the background. I'm also using a blending brush from Crafter's Companion that's relatively new to me. I love how smooth the bristles are, and each one comes in its own case. Now, to create the illusion that the castle is off in the distance, I'm going to blend an even layer of gray ink over the castle image. I realize here that the stars are a little too close on one side and I need to cover them up with a little bit of low-tack tape. I really love stencils as a low-cost option to add a lot of versatility to your stash. And Scrappy Boy in particular has an amazing library of scene builder stencils. Stencils can be oriented different ways, masked off, and even flipped over to change the look. And you only need a few of them to be able to mix and match and make a whole bunch of different kinds of scenes. Now, once I have a fairly even layer of that gray toned ink, I'm going to change that out for a black ink and change my larger brush out for a more detailed brush. These little brush daubers I just got off of Amazon. They're similar to the little finger daubers, but they have a brush end instead of foam. I really like that they stack, they come in their own case, and they're exactly what I was looking for small details like this. Using the smaller brush, I'm going to take the black ink and blend it into the edges all the way around my silhouette. This helps sharpen up the edges of our image while still maintaining that foggy quality of a really large thing that's really far away in the distance. Helping to define those edges will really go a long way in the next step. And of course, the best part about using a stencil is the peel and reveal. Now that my main image is done, it's time to fill in the sky. And again, I'll choose a lighter and darker tone in the same color family. Color choice can really change the feeling of a whole inked piece. And while I might choose a blue sky for a princess, or a spooky night sky for Halloween, I decided to go with purple tones for this particular card. This is a backdrop for a villain, after all, and for some reason purple skies always make me feel like there's a little magic in the air. And to me, one of the best things about villains is that even the human ones seem to have a little magic. Now with my lighter purple, I used a much softer touch around my focal image. Then as you can see, I'll go in with my darker color, focusing around the edges of the panel with a much heavier hand. This method is a really foolproof way to make something look like it has a glow behind it. Once I'm satisfied with the look of my sky, I'm going to bring the stencil back in and adjust it so we can make a sky full of stars. Again, I'll use some low-tack tape to mask off any part of the stencil that I don't want to use, and I'll switch back to my small detail brushes so that I can control where I want to put my stars. Now, I really like using distress ink for this type of technique, mostly because it's formulated to be translucent, and every time I add a new layer, the layer I applied before shows through a bit. But if that's not the look you're going for, I would maybe use pigment ink or a dye ink that is formulated to be more opaque and less translucent. But for this project, that purple background gave me the perfect villainous stars. Last but not least, I wanted to add a little bit more evil intent to my background. And oh my God, I love this stencil. It's new this month and it's called the Cracks Background. To me, this has so many possibilities. I used it a couple of times this month in my projects, and there is 100% of a chance that you will see it again. Not only do you need this for all your Villainous makes, but Halloween as well. You can see my hand did a little dance because I was so happy with the way this turned out. With that last peel and reveal, we are ready to move on to the next step. There's almost always a point in a project where I really second guess my choices, but I've been doing this long enough to know that that moment will be counterbalanced by the moment when you put the right piece on the project. It always makes me feel like I go from being a joker to a genius. And this right here, adding this panel, was that moment for me in this project. Those scene builder stencils really do a lot of heavy lifting. And when I saw this, I knew we were going in the right direction. Now I know it looks like I'm doing a lot of finagling to get that in there, but I know I'm putting a lot of shaker bits inside, and I don't want the panel to lift up and obstruct them. Now, I said earlier that I cut this frame 5 times. We've already laid down the first cut, which gave me my stencil panel and the white frame piece that I used to align it. Then I cut it 2 more times in thick white cardstock and once with dollar store foam board. I went ahead and layered all 3 of those together off camera, which gives me this thick, sturdy frame. That foam board by itself is usually plenty sturdy, but when you see at the end what I'm making out of this, you'll understand why I wanted to add a little more structure. And of course, the 5th and final frame that I cut is this gorgeous gold metallic, which serves as the top of the shaker and also adds that regal finishing touch to the frame. While this set doesn't come with a specific die to cut your acetate, this is a very simple shape to just trace and cut by hand. I find the easiest way is to trace on the inside and then cut slightly to the outside of the line that you traced. That way you have enough acetate to cover the inside of the window and enough to attach it to the frame while making sure that it is small enough so you can't see it around the edges. Now I won't lie to you, I don't use any special acetate. This acetate I got a long time ago, and if I remember correctly, I believe I got it on clearance at like a Michael's. It's good for large shaker windows like this because it's really sturdy, and it does stay nice and clear because it has this protective film over it. But truthfully, it's not that easy to die cut, almost impossible in fact. So if anyone watching this has suggestions, drop it down in the comments. What's your favorite acetate for making shaker cards? Once you have your acetate trimmed to a decent size, go ahead and attach it to the back of the last frame layer. When it comes to constructing shaker cards, there is definitely controversy about what adhesive is the best for attaching your acetate to your cardstock. I know some people are all redline tape all the time, and while I respect that, I am a liquid glue girl until the end. My go-to glue these days is Sizzix Express Glue, but whatever fast-drying craft glue you usually use probably will work just fine. My only real tip for using a liquid glue for this application is to grab one of these rubber glue erasers. It's the easiest, quickest way to get glue off of acetate if you have a little bit run over. One of these came as a tip for my multi-tool, but they're sold separately at a lot of arts and crafts stores. Next, I'm very excited to be featuring one of my favorite new products from Scrappy Boy Stamps, an entire new line of shaker plates. In the last few years, I have really become a fan of shaker bits. I'm actually a little embarrassed to admit how many I have now. So when I saw these plates, baby, I thought Christmas had come early. Some of these plates have multiple different images on them, and some of them have one image over and over. I knew I wanted to use the castle, the glass slipper, and Cinderella's crown, so I selectively die cut just what I needed and added them to my shaker mix. Now, although you can use these by themselves, things do tend to move around a little better if you mix in things like seed beads or other sequins, things that are a little bit heavier than paper. I had even originally put in some little acrylic beads, but they ended up being slightly too large, so I took them out. Once I had all my shaker bits loaded into the window, it was time to add some glue and close it up. Just take a moment before you stick it to make sure everyone is inside the car, if you know what I mean. You don't want to do all that work and then accidentally have some of those little bits glued to the side of your shaker card where you can't move them. Also, the angle of the camera is making this look a little off center, but trust me, I put it on perfectly straight. My best tip for finishing off pretty much any shaker element is to make sure that your top piece is stuck evenly and give it a little time to dry. I know it's tempting to shake it right away. I get the shaky shake fever too, but resistance really is worth it. If it wasn't already obvious, this card is built around the evil stepmother from the new Villainous Bombshells stamp set. But before we start building out the front of our project, I have one more element I wanted to put together from the die set. 3 die cut words come with the magic wall mirror: magic, spell, and wicked. Each one comes with the word and its outline, which cut beautifully and are very simple to put together. I seriously love these so much. I think I use them on almost every project this month. Hey, Scrappy Boy, if you're listening, I hope we have more words like this coming soon. Now, for real, I don't have any inside information about more of these coming up, but while we have them now, you should probably grab them. Did you see that piece of tape just have a mind of its own and fly right up on my project? I don't know how that happened, but by the magic of video, it's gone. Let's get to decorating. Hand to my heart, the whole inspiration behind this project was that I wanted, nay, needed to pair up one of the best sentiments from the Princess Pinups with the evil stepmother from Villainous Bombshells. Once I thought of it, I had to make it. I couldn't get it out of my mind. It's also worth mentioning that I got this tiny precision press stamp tool from We Are Memory Keepers recently. And if you aren't 100% sold on a stamp positioner, this one is a great price point for starting out. And I have found that it fits almost all of my Scrappy Boy stamps. I actually got it at a scrapbooking convention. And speaking of scrapbooking conventions, you should see if Scrappy Boy is going to be at a convention near you. Sean and Paul, the owners of Scrappy Boy, are so fun in person. And it's the only way to get an up-close and personal look at all of the design team projects. We send them in to be displayed in the booth every month, and the booth is always absolutely covered in them. If you haven't left me a comment down below yet, tell me if you've ever met Scrappy Boy in person and what show you were attending. And of course, tell me what you bought. Okay, let's get back to the project. So when you stamp these sentiments, you can totally leave them as they are, which is 2 lines together on each stamp. I really like how they look when they're cut into strips and then matted individually to match the project. To me, it gives more of a quirky look, and I think these images really lend themselves to that style. I also don't feel like these have to be cut perfectly, so I just attach them to the paper and cut the mats by hand. I personally think that the imperfectness adds a little bit of whimsy, but feel free to cut these with a little sentiment strip die or a trimmer. You do you, boo-boo. Now that we have our sentiment strips matted, let's attach everything and get it all finished up. The sentiment that I ultimately chose from Princess Pinups goes like this. Who needs a glass slipper? I'd rather have a glass of wine. But since this isn't a princess, I thought a villain might want a wicked glass of wine. I know it's just probably me being silly, but I was so pleased with that, you have no idea. Since I was adhering most of this to acetate, I did want to make sure that I used a pretty strong foam adhesive. This is actually a roll of foam squares that are meant for matting photographs. You can find these rolls at a lot of big box stores, particularly if they have a framing department. For this video, I left in a little bit more of the composition of the project than I usually do. If you're a return viewer and you've watched a few of my other tutorials, let me know if you like these details left in or if you'd rather me skip over them the way I have in the past. After I finished attaching my sentiment and my stamped image, I really only felt there was one thing missing. I don't know about you, but I don't feel like she's truly a bombshell until she has some bling. Now, I just used some small clear faux crystals, but I think it would be really, really cute to cut some of the shapes from the shaker bit panels and use those as your extra embellishments instead of jewels or gems. I actually wanted to do that originally, but I didn't want to cover up too much more of my stencil panel that was in the background, so I opted for the little crystals basically just because they were smaller. If this project had had a better spot for it, I totally would have added 2 of the little glass slippers, and I even thought about cutting out a little crown for her head, but since she really isn't a princess or a queen, I decided to leave it off. Once I was done with the bling, there is only one more step left. I'm going to turn that big, beautiful shaker into a Memory Dex card. If you're new to Memory Dex cards, this stitched Memory Dex trio is a great set to start with. With just this one set, you can turn so many of your other stamps and dies into Memory Dex cards because sometimes it's fun to just get out your supplies and make something. And then instead of feeling like you need to complete an album or a card, you can just put it on a Memory Dex and display it so that you can enjoy it. And that is an excellent takeaway. It's okay to make things just because you enjoy making them. Speaking of enjoying things, I'm very much enjoying shaking that, by the way. And while we all know shaker cards are really fun, you don't have to make this particular die into a shaker if you don't want to. For my second example, I went with a shaped card and leaned more heavily into the idea that it was a mirror. Using silver metallic cardstock will give you much more of a mirror look. And I know they're supposed to be evil, but I have a soft spot for villains, and these 2 evil queens are some of my favorites. If you made it this far, thank you so much for joining me today. We love, love, love our little crafty community, and we could not do this without you. If you want to see more projects from this month from our amazing design team, there are new projects posted every single day on the Scrappy Boy Facebook page and Instagram. There you'll also find shop updates, new releases, sneak peeks, and any announcements. The links to both pages are in the description box below. If you're interested in the new release, you'll also find scrappyboy.com linked down below. You'll find all of the Scrappy Boy stamps, stencils, and dies that I used today, among many, many other new things. If you like this video, please give us a thumbs up and subscribe so you don't miss any other uploads. If nothing else, remember this: while the good girls might become princesses, only the bad girls become queen. See you next time. Bye-bye.